Welcome to ISA, or as we've been calling it, ISA.
I thought it was just Italians talking about Isa.
Yeah, ISA. It sounds like a really nice name. We should start calling it ISA, right?
Oh, in the Balkans as well. Oh, okay.
There you go. So welcome to ISA, and welcome to our panel on beating the clock, about short games and simulations in the political science classroom. So what I want to do here today, first of all, is maybe give you an idea of what our history is, like where we came from before we came to this book, do a little bit of a summary of what we were hoping to do with this book. So I think I'm just going to kind of give a general overview. I'll do a play-by-play. You guys can do some color, because I know there's going to be some things I will absolutely miss. But, if you're interested in learning how to create games, how to build games, that first book is probably a good one for you. If you are just somebody who wants to try some new games and maybe you're new at it or maybe you're not, right? That's really what this book is all about. The name of the first book is Simulations in the Political Science Classroom, Games Without Frontiers. And the new one is Beating the Clock. And the subtitle, thank you, The Power of Short Games and Active Learning in the Political Science Classroom. So the first one has been out for a couple of years now. The second one is on its way to press in the next month or so. So coming out hopefully pretty soon. My name is Mark Harvey. I am a professor at the University of St. Mary. I'm in the odd position of having a PhD in political science, but also running an MBA program. So I have this weird business kind of economic stuff going on one side. I teach global management, for example, right? So ISA stuff. But I also have a strong political science background. In addition to my areas of interest here in pedagogy and games and active learning, my other big area really is the impact of celebrities on people's political attitudes. And so, you want to check that out if you have an interest. That's fun too.
All right, so yeah,
The bird.
I'm James Pigeon Fielder. I'm a 25-year military retiree. I've adopted the civilian life very well. I retired as an associate professor at the Air Force Academy. Did not want to chase tenure track positions all over the United States at 46 years old, so I took an instructor position at Colorado State University. But they treat me like a mascot because I have unusual research interest. As far as I know, I'm one of 3 political scientists who researches the politics of game worlds, like when people play Dungeons and Dragons, World of Warcraft, EVE Online, how they build political institutions in the game and how does it affect them when they come back out of the game as players. And Pigeon comes from people get nicknames for all sorts of strange reasons in the military, and I just happen to have pet pigeons. And when I thought, should I go by my real name, James, even though the only people who call me James are my wife when I'm in trouble and university administrators, I tried to go to 2 different conferences using James, and all it took was one person to call me Pigeon. And about 2 years ago, NATO cited my work in a policy document. They call me Pigeon in the document. All right. Yes. Yes.
My name is Ryan Gibb. I'm a professor of international studies at Baker University. It's a small liberal arts college in Kansas. I teach IRCP American. You do it all at a small liberal arts college. But I've been at that university for 10 years. My research interests are generally IR Central Africa, CP Central Africa, and I get to publish those once in a while, but like probably many of you, you chase your interests, you chase interesting questions. And so that finds me looking all over that part of the world for things that I know and things that I want to learn more about.
So we started off writing a game. It was Games Without Frontiers. It was about games and simulations in political science classroom. And it was justified by the fact that in our personal experience, not only were there not a lot of people doing games and simulations, but there is in some corners kind of resistance to the idea. There's people who basically think, well, you're just playing games and having fun. What are you doing, and what is the value of this? I ran into a guy at one of these panels about 10 years ago, maybe or more, where he was actually worried about not getting tenure because he was using diplomacy to teach games in the classroom, and the other people in his department just seemed to be really, skeptical about that as a pedagogical tool. And so part of what we wanted to do in that book is justify it as a pedagogical tool. Look at the educational research, look at how it's been used in political science, and then make it an argument for it. It also included methods on how to build games and what the value of games are and how it works. Like when we're actually doing this process, how does it affect students in a certain way? And there were examples of games that were in those chapters as well, but they were also data driven. So when we had a game, it was like, well, it's not just a game we're presenting, we're giving you some data to illustrate that these are how we're achieving student objectives or what students are getting out of it. And so it was more of a kind of academic sort of book, if you will. But then we had an idea that, hey, maybe we should just make a book of games. And, there are others out there. But one thing that we thought was sort of lacking was a justification for, along with a whole set of short games, right? Things that people can do in one session or less. Because time is at a premium. When we're planning our classrooms, there's only so much time we've got. So how are we going to make the best use of that? And if we can get an activity that's really going to be powerful and short, like that allows us a whole lot more flexibility as far as trying to reach and activate students and get them really involved. That's kind of my general overview. What you guys have any thoughts on this before we get into questions?
How we settled on this book for short games is like in the first book, there's a debate between should you use long form games or should you use short form games. Mm-hmm. And the most common feedback we've received as editors was educators saying we just don't have time to run these longer games. They look cool, but if I could just have something that I could run, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe one class, that seemed like it'd be there was a huge appetite for these short form games, and so that led to this current volume.
The idea that you could have a game that somebody who doesn't know how to run games, who's never done it before, can just open up a chapter and with very little preparation, just bam, there it is. You're ready.
The first book was a traditional book where you had 18, 25-page chapters discussing building the game or simulation, the game itself, and then the assessment. So it's walking through the whole process. We don't clearly have that with this second go. In the second book, or this book you're all contributing to, we came out of the first book from an either MPSA or ISA conversation about that's long. We just want an encyclopedia or a lot of quick books or quick games that we can just readily apply. So what we, thankfully, we came up with a recipe of things that you need to run a game, and we didn't start from scratch. I had a book from the English department from 30 years ago that came up with how to do engaged learning using different types of literature and how to apply that. So the format, the template, the starting point that we all got was kind of built from that, like how to teach English in the classroom. Well, like big ideas, but then applied quickly. So that was the format that we sent out to everybody. Is like, okay, using knowledge that we have from like professors in literature and English that have taught this and taught complex ideas with short games, using the concept of a recipe. Like you need to know the ingredients, you need to know how to bake it and what it should look like when it comes out. Then let's all try to fit our ideas into that format so that people can readily read through these chapters and have like a systematic or a formalized idea of like running games, and then riff from there, right? Learn the rules before you break them.
I have a set of discussion questions, and maybe we can kind of take turns and just, if any of you have any thoughts or ideas, they're sort of in the form of advice maybe to people who may be new to doing this kind of thing. The first question I'm going to ask you may not be applicable to everybody. Maybe you haven't had this experience, but I know I have, and it's also an opportunity for Pigeon to play his hits as far as like, the justification, how it all works. Yep. It's the stuff he's really good at, so I want to let him talk a little bit about this. But the first question is, how do you address concerns about the educational value of games? So this goes back to something I was talking about earlier about this guy I met one time where, it looked like maybe he wasn't going to get tenure. He did, by the way. He's the chair of his department now, so hey, good news, happy ending. But like what, how do you defend that? And I mean, for me, I think the short answer is there's a load of pedagogical information, data that suggests that it is valuable. And to say more on that, I'm just going to like hand it off to the bird.
Actually, I've got to slightly punt this in because I've lucked out in one critical way. I've had top level support at 2 institutions so far.
Mm-hmm.
Like Air Force Academy, 100% supported using games in the classroom
Mm-hmm.
because they know the value, knew the value of wargaming in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And at CSU, I mean, I arrived, they looked at my record, they said, well, he seems to know what he's doing. And both 2 department heads so far have said, the feedback I'm receiving from your students and what aligns with how they're performing in your class suggests that, the games are clearly working. Now to kind of riff on Mark's trying to like drag some more like academia out of me and like
Play the hits, Pigeon.
Okay, so man, put me on the spot like that.
I'm sorry.
So I learned over time to leverage. I guess the 2 main things. There's probably like 5 main things I leverage, but the 2 big ones I leverage in running games are liminality and symbolic correspondence. Liminality being a well-designed game. You come into this game space. It's basically a ritual performance. It taps into psychology of ritual, and then in a well-played game, players will remember they'll remember all sorts of strange things, and they'll do all sorts of strange things, like dribbling a ball, or you can't touch a ball with your hands. Your poker hand can only have 7 cards. But then they get transformed in some way because everything that happens to them in this liminal space, also called the magic circle, feels real to them. And assuming you do a good debrief, when they come out, they remember what they learned, how it felt to overcome a challenge inside the game. That's 1. 2, symbolic correspondence. That is also rooted in ritual performance. So you would have a ritual performer with a mask of an animal or spirit, the skin of an animal, a robe, jewelry, smoke, fire, water, to make it feel otherworldly. So when they're in the space, again, practicing a ritual performance, it's a mini rite of passage that transform them. And also with a good debrief, you come out and you remember the good about it. You remember that you were in the presence of an animal or spirit. Modern cynic would say we don't wear the skins of animals or the mask of spirits, and say, well, you wear a suit to work, you're wearing a uniform in the military, you dress up, cosplay for a game convention. That's all symbolic correspondence. The idea is you're embodying a character, but that character becomes part of you. So in a game space, if I'm getting students to play roles, I'm putting them in the skin of that role. So now instead of reading about political science, they're doing it. And they start to feel the stress of what it's like to be a prime minister or a president or a CEO or something like that. Debrief them, they come out and they go, I felt it. I felt what it was like, I felt the concepts, I guess you could say.
So it's one thing to be able to just explain the idea to somebody. It's another thing for them to actually live it, experience it, be in that space. And that's the educational value of it. So if you want to sell it to somebody, I think that's a great way to sell it.
Without throwing our graduate training under the bus, really didn't receive a lot of education about education. We're all supposed to be researchers. So we go out of our way to find these things out, and we build from there. And posed with that question, I don't have that problem at my university. Nobody doubts this, because 10 years ago they were doing flipped classrooms, right, where you had engaged learning, students teaching each other. That's waned a little bit. Instead, across the campus, all the faculty, many of the faculty, have different types of games. Our history department runs games and simulations with figurines, right, to battle out different wars, maybe with not the same outcome as the historical examples, but then debriefing and writing lesson plans from there. Our economics department does this too, right? Paper, rock, scissors tournaments, different types of applied game theory when it comes to prisoner's dilemma, etc. I don't have to make that argument. I can point skeptics also to the education, right? Like education programs and departments on campus saying they never teach for the first time in front of a classroom all by themselves, at which point I cite a TED Talk that I once watched where the professor in that TED Talk said, perhaps you shouldn't do this thing for the first time when you're put on the spot. I forget who gave that TED Talk, but he said it powerfully. It might have been the guy at the end of the table here.
Oh, hey.
You punched the table, Pigeon. You punched the table and you said maybe you shouldn't do this. Maybe when you have the choice to push the button, right? Like it shouldn't be.
Oh, can I see the quote?
The first time you practice responding to a crisis shouldn't be during an actual crisis.
There it is. My paraphrase.
Yeah.
No, I have had a lot of support, but I also understand the critics, and I also understand the self-doubt when this is not part of your training, and this is like something that you have to kind of discover for yourself.
And fortunately, I have not had any negative experiences at the institutions that I've been at either. For the most part, we're committed to transformational learning. And so likewise, I have many colleagues who do exactly the same kind of thing that I do across different disciplines. It's more, what we're really kind of railing against a little bit more is that there still is some resistance in the academic community to these ideas. And so trying to create a space where it is more permissive for people, or maybe even for some people who've never done this before, to give it a shot, give it a try, learn how to do it, learn the magic, go into that magic circle, right? Let's learn the magic of this thing. And there really is some magic, I think.
That actually, wait for it, dovetails with work by sociologist Gary Fine, who was researching game players, and he said, I'm interviewing players, like Dungeons and Dragons players. They can remember games that are like 30 years old, like amazing a level of detail, like smells, sounds, the shirts people were wearing, art on the wall, and then they can't remember what they had for breakfast like a week prior. So you get that a very, very visceral feeling game. It really does stick in players' minds.
Developing like tentpole programs is really, really helpful. So we had an external reviewer come in to discuss another program on campus, French, and she described how amazing French was on her campus, that everybody wanted to take French classes because they did these really engaged learning activities, without sacrificing rigor or pedagogy, right? Like getting students in the classes because they'll know they're going to have a good time and accidentally learn something. I think that's also kind of a way to look at it. It's as more of a holistic approach than like a specific learning outcome, although we can also clearly trace learning outcomes to goals. I think if they're having fun, if they know that they're going to role play or game play, then they'll sign up for these classes, maybe develop an interest in the discipline.
What happens when you're doing a game or simulation, whatever you want to call it, and things just don't go quite as expected?
Just that, it depends on what's going wrong, because sometimes you can save something by asking if it's a learning opportunity. Was it a broken part of the game, or is it something we didn't expect because we had a fixed set of outcomes we expected to have? So Mark's chapter from a previous book about Risk, I've had students develop peace that just stop playing. I'm like, this is very interesting. This is the constructivist approach. Maybe we don't need to go to war. So if you stop playing a game that's supposed to incentivize, this realist behavior, then that's a different conversation. I think that's probably where we all go. Is how do I make this, to use Jon Stewart's phrase, how do I polish this turd, right? How do I make this into something that we can use? Because that could be a learning opportunity. I'll give an example. A game that I play that we do in class, I've really changed quite a bit from how it was designed 50 years ago or whatever, because it's supposed to break people out into gender and race groups in order to use the instructor to discriminate against those groups. I'm not going to do that in a classroom, but I'm going to float the idea of okay, well, this is supposed to be an open game. You develop groups on your own. What if those groups maybe are more realistic in nature, that you hated on this group or hated on this group? How would they respond differently? I'd let them have maybe that experience between their ears, and rather the lived experience of being further marginalized, something they've already experienced, but I changed it, and it gives us a talking point for later in the game. So I think, figure out something that you can salvage from games as they collapse.
Well, this is actually something, I can't remember if I've spoken to Cherry about this before. I certainly have spoken to Amanda Rosen and Victor Assault on the idea that I can teach somebody how to design a game and the mechanics that go into it, but the magic that how to be a game master in the center, that's what I don't know how to put in an article. How do I teach somebody the theatrics of running a game? And to answer that question, it's tacit knowledge. I have a good I know we're always talking about having quantitative and qualitative measures, so this is more intuitive. If I sense that a game is going poorly, I have a sense on how to redirect it in some way to get it back on track. I don't know how to put that into words.
Well, now, didn't you mention a book or something on the theatrics? And you shared that with me yesterday, so maybe you should say what you know about that.
Amanda Rosen of the Naval War College, U.S. Naval War College, sang praises for this book. I didn't get it in the mail until, I flew yesterday. I didn't get it in the mail till like 2 days ago, so I haven't had a chance to look at it. So I'm going off of Amanda's remarks. All the World's a Stage, the Theater of Political Simulations by Hemda Ben Yehuda. And okay, there.
Nice. My comments, let me start with what Ryan said about Risk. So, Risk is a game that I've used in the international relations classroom quite a bit. And the way that I play it now is based on the fact that students did things that I did not expect. Now, I would not call them disastrous things, but things where it's like, wow, there's something different that's happening when you put people in a room and they behave socially toward each other and they're not really thinking about the rules. And what would happen if I behaved in a way that wasn't consistent with the rules, right? How does that change the nature of the game? And so I would say that usually when something goes wrong, if you will, it doesn't necessarily mean that things have gone badly.
Well timed.
I play Dungeons and Dragons with my daughters. Okay, I'm a dungeon master. Lots of fun. But what makes it fun is that I make plans and they do stuff that I have no idea they're going to do, right? You think they're going to slay the dragon, they're not going to slay the dragon. They're going to talk to the dragon. They're going to reason with it. They're going to pressure it. They're going to it's really weird. And so I think one thing about being a game master or an administrator of any kind of games is that you have to be flexible and you have to assume that those students are going to take you someplace that you didn't want to go. Then the question is, what do you do with it at that point? And so I refer to it really as kind of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat, right? And sometimes it's sort of like it's a kind of good kind of creativity, and then it changed the nature of it. And sometimes it's sort of negative and maybe a little bit nefarious. I had a student one time, I was doing a trade game, right, where students are trading tickets and so on, and it illustrates free trade, and it starts off with very restrictive trade, and eventually you open things up and anybody can buy anything, and the amount of money in the economy goes through the roof, right? Well, there are limitations to it, but they're only psychological limitations, and so the idea is you tell students the only money that you have to buy anything with is the money you have in your bank account now. Now, of course, they can lie about it, but who knows? I don't know what's in their bank account. One time there's this guy just basically wanting to sabotage the game. And he ends up just at the end buying everything at whatever value it was, thousands of dollars, whatever hypothetically it ended up being. And he thought he was pulling one over on me by basically, because the idea was not for that to happen, right? He just did it in order to sort of say, okay, whatever. So, but then it was interesting in the debriefing afterwards, where I was like, okay, so did you really have the money for all that? Oh, wait, okay, so you used credit cards, did you? Oh, okay. Do countries ever do that? Oh, wow, what happens when that happens? I know, let's talk about this, right? So we now have a discussion about whether or not there's an impact to people going in debt, right? Now you can also have a discussion about wealth distribution, right? How do all you feel that all the stuff's in this guy's hands now, right? Does that change things? What's the impact of that? And so this guy actually created a great opportunity for a really good discussion, even though that was not his intention at all. And so I think, I don't know how to teach flexibility. It's kind of like what Pigeon was saying here. You can't necessarily teach people this stuff, but I would say if there's any one bit of advice, it's you have to be open-minded, let things happen, think on your feet, use your brain, and then just try to create something awesome out of whatever it is that's happened.
You have dismissive students that don't want to be part of this, that I want to get to my biology class. But I guess that gives us another opportunity, right? So in the Council of Foreign Relations, if they are a really passive national security advisor, it's a conversation about what happens when you have an ineffective member of the cabinet, or a cabinet position that somebody in that cabinet position that's misrepresenting their interests. And then the conflict of interest in those things. And so too with Risk, and so too with these other games, because students don't always cooperate. They don't always have the buy-in that you want them to have. There's a couple of different ways to get around them without shaming, punishing them. But it could be part of that conversation.
Maybe there is a point of no return where you just have to shut things down. I can think of an activity where I had to do that one time as well too. But something we don't talk often enough about, but I think is a very important thing, is how do you set it up at the beginning? That is how do you organize the people right? Figuring out their personalities and are they going to behave in a way that you want them to behave? And so like when I do games and activities like this, I never let the students self-select groups, okay? I figure out who are these people and what roles are they going to play? How can I get this one to grow? How can I get this one, how can I like take this person down a notch by giving them something that's a little harder for them, that is a little bit outside their comfort zone? I actually specifically assign roles sometimes that are contrary to what they normally believe to push it,
Yeah.
right? So like
Well,
if there's somebody who's really pro-Israel, maybe they need to play the role of a Hamas or something like that. If you're a Republican, maybe you are a Democrat. Now, if a student who's super uncomfortable with that, then I think you do need to make, kind of back off, because you don't want to like really, really make it a horrible experience for them. But I think everybody has room to grow.
Okay.
And I think it's an opportunity sometimes to like make them think about something from a perspective that they haven't normally considered. When you have role-playing exercises, they are supposed to be role-playing. Now, the challenge to that is you can't force somebody to do something that they don't want to do. So sometimes students will play contrary to the role that you've given them, but you may want to prod them, coach them a little bit, try to get people who are going to play the part pretty well, because if you get into that land where it's like it's beyond the likely, then you're really not learning the lesson that you're supposed to learn. Now, having said that, sometimes things don't go that way, and maybe that's a learning opportunity too. Maybe somebody doesn't play Putin like the way you should, and then that's an opportunity to talk about, like, okay, do you think Putin would have really done this? Okay, if he had, what would have happened, right? And then you can go into a land of hypotheticals to have another discussion. I always think a good question is asking the students, might it have turned out like this? Or maybe not, but why? Why not, right? And who are going to be the free riders that might tube this thing if we don't put them in a place? Like if you put all those free riders in one place, then they're going to talk about drinking on the weekend and not about your activity. But if you separate those people out, now there's a disadvantage to that too, in that they may continue to free ride. You get these people who don't care and they're not engaged. Does that happen sometimes in real life? Have we had a pandemic where like a whole bunch of people just tuned out and did not care and like, oh, it's not real, whatever, it's like I'm just going to like do whatever that's absolutely realistic. And so sometimes you can take those situations where it's not what you expect, and that is the learning opportunity. There is something new to be learned from that, But if I am going to assess them in some way, we can talk about that later on, debrief and say like, let's say it's an essay in terms of like, what did you learn from this? Then obviously the people who are going to be highly engaged are probably going to get more out of it and get a better grade than those who just like, I don't know, right? You're going to get out of it what you put into it.
I had the chapter in the previous book about Council of Foreign Relations and Model Diplomacy. One, my cudgel, I think they changed it and it's less helpful. But then two, I think also some of the opportunities they give you for memos before people come and maybe discuss things helps for the introverts, to help people prepare, people who don't necessarily like to speak, they have something in front of them. So that makes it a little bit easier. And then when it actually comes to a conversation at the National Security Council, I form ad hoc caucuses of like-minded agencies so that they can kind of talk about the solutions that they came to a specific crisis, and then maybe present something more as a team so that they think pair share a little bit more, and then they have stronger positions even if they don't always agree on things.
I wanted to pose the question, like, what is the value perhaps of doing a short game as opposed to something that is more extended? And when you're planning an entire semester and you're trying to get a lot of stuff done, for me, the bottom line is, how do I get the most bang for my buck? And so, by having, and that's not to say that long games are bad, I think long games are great, but I think that when you only have a limited amount of time, the obvious question is like, how am I going to use that time? And, hopefully this book is going to offer some very specific opportunities to make that happen.
I think we addressed this a little bit today already, but the adaptability sometimes of the short game, the less commitment as it comes to an instructor to making a whole course about one thing. Sometimes that's what you want, but sometimes to pepper throughout the semester, short games to keep students engaged is really useful too. So I said briefly the adaptability of a lot of short games, the Prisoner's Dilemma, Tic-Tac-Toe. I have a piece in our Palgrave Encyclopedia about coin flips, flipping the pennies, and that is adaptable to a lot of different type of logic games. So I think those are some of the strengths that we can address in short games. But I know that everybody else, like we're all co-authors on a chapter about short games and a book.
Yeah, I'll throw that plug in there as well. That like we actually did do a chapter in the Palgrave. What is it called? Palgrave
It's the Oxford. What? Okay, I'm gonna miss it.
Encyclopedia
I'll look it up.
International Relations. Yeah, Palgrave International Relations Pedagogy. So that's another chapter that we wrote anyway, just focusing on short games and international relations.
It's nice. There are probably 60 authors. It's similar to ours. It's a massive book. But
We're in a
it's
book
lovely.
with Stephen Walt.
Oh,
Wow.
and Brent Steele? No.
Yeah, we got like, woo, we're like famous now by proxy. What were you gonna say about that, Pigeon?
Oh, so the only thing I was going to add, so I have two views. Like, I traditionally have taught two classes at CSU, comparative authoritarianism and current world problems. I love current world problems. I wrote the textbook for it, so I purposely designed that class to have a long form simulation at the end. That way they can practice everything they've learned. Matter of fact, this semester I'm having them run it. The entire course is a simulation. So I'm doing very little lecture. Like every day it's like, okay, what do you teams do for this topic? For my other class though, comparative authoritarianism, which I'm not teaching this semester, there is very little time to fit in a long form game, but there's a lot of very focused topics. So I found in that class, it's very nice to take a very specific topic and just build an entire lesson around that topic. And so so like everyone build a team based on a monarchy. Everybody build a team based on a sultanist regime. And so now the short form game works very, very well in that sort of classroom.